The race for D.C.'s delegate seat on Capitol Hill is heating up tonight. The seat is currently held by Eleanor Holmes Norton, who says she plans to run again. Now, D.C. Council member Robert White also announced his campaign last month.
And just a few hours ago, Ward 2 D.C. Council member Brooke Pinto announced she is joining the race, and she is joining us now live to talk a bit about this. Thank you for being here. So we know, Council member Pinto, you are running for D.C.'s congressional seat. There are at least 9 people now who want to do the very same thing. So why you and why now?
Well, good evening, and thank you for having me. You know, this is really a continuation of everything that I have focused on my whole career, which has all been about fighting for and serving district residents. And as I think about the pivotal moment that we are in as a city, I know that the best way that I can fight for district residents most effectively is by being our delegate on Capitol Hill. And I'm going to do this by building on what I have done throughout my career and building consensus and developing a track record of solving the most challenging issues that have been facing district residents by fighting to protect our autonomy, by fighting to support our families and a fair economy, attract new industries here and great paying jobs and affordability, and by continuing my work on public safety so that regardless of what neighborhood you live in, every person in DC can be safe.
Now, we know the first delegate, Walter Fauntleroy, and D.C. delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, they both have prioritized home rule and statehood. So how do you continue to carry out that agenda?
Well, I am so appreciative for the incredible legacy that Congresswoman Holmes Norton has built and the efforts that she has engaged in to fight for DC statehood, to fight for our autonomy. And I want to build on that legacy. And in this moment, it's really important that someone play effective defense on the attacks and interference that have come our way from President Trump, from other congressional Republicans. But it's also really important that we have someone play offense and think about new ways we can use this role to advance initiatives that are going to support our families and that are going to bring new opportunities for our residents and our corridors.
So since you're talking about this, and we know that this congressional seat comes with some very limited voting power, what is the best way to advocate for DC residents in that particular role?
Well, I plan to do it in a very similar way that I have accomplished most of my major legislative accomplishments, which is reaching out, speaking to people, building consensus. It's what I did when I put together Secure DC, the largest public safety package in our city's history, with over 100 different safety interventions, by speaking to residents in all 8 wards, to community members, to seniors, to young people, to public safety experts, to our police, and put together this package that had a lot of input and ultimately was passed unanimously. That's what I plan to do on the Hill, reaching out, working with both of our Democratic allies, but also across the aisle and exploring new ways that we can support the District of Columbia. We need someone to be dynamic in this moment and build consensus and protect our District of Columbia values that are so under attack right now.
All right, so we know Eleanor Holmes Norton. She currently holds the seat that you're vying for right now. At 88 years old, she says she still plans to run again, despite criticism and folks asking her to get out of the race. So you put out a statement about Holmes Norton seeming to agree it is time for her to step down. Can you tell us more?
Well, look, as I said, I have a huge amount of respect and really gratitude for all that Congresswoman Holmes Norton has done for our city. No one has been a stronger voice for our need for autonomy and for our efforts around statehood than Congresswoman Holmes Norton. And I really want to build on her legacy. I think this is a really important moment for our city. I am ready to take on this work, build on what she has accomplished, and do more and different things with the position when it comes to our economy, when it comes to our safety, and when it comes to these attacks that are coming because of my track record with public safety. When we see congressional Republicans seek to prosecute all 14-year-old children as adults, sending them to prisons around the country, or undermine our ability to have a judicial nominating commission or say that the District of Columbia local government can never change the criminal code. It's important to have someone in that role with credibility who has worked on these issues, who understands the unique interplay between the local and federal government and areas that the federal government can be a part of our public safety goals, but not in the way that current congressional Republicans are suggesting.
Councilmember Pinto, I have to ask you about this. I understand a complaint has been filed suggesting that you are using your current office to promote your campaign. How do you respond to that?
Well, look, I have always been very committed to running an office that has not just the basic requirements of ethics and transparency, but the highest standards of ethics and transparency. It's always been very important to me, continues to be. Ever since I've been the chair of the Council's Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety, which I took on almost 3 years ago, I began really making sure that my outreach was much further than Ward 2, where I'm so proud to represent, but that I was working with residents across the city. Because when it comes to our public safety goals, it's really important that I'm sharing what we're working on with legislation and soliciting input from residents around the city. And so that's what we have been doing. That's what we continue to do. And I think what's so important to make sure that I'm effectively representing the needs and interests of district residents.
Now, council member, on that same note, I live in the district. I've never received any of her mailers until now. So wouldn't you say that the timing of this is still a bit off or odd?
So we send out newsletters very regularly through our office to district residents. We have the end of the fiscal year, which just happened September 30th, and so that's what that timing was about. But we often send newsletters and mailers out, and I think it's really important, as I said, to share our legislative updates, but also to solicit input from residents. We do this through public safety walks I have in wards. We do this through mailers. We do this through newsletters. We do this through telephone town halls. We try to be as creative as we can to reach residents so that they can be a part of the legislative process, which I think is very important. But I always am very committed to making sure that we are following the highest standards when it comes to ethics. And that's what I'm going to continue to do.
Now, you've talked about how federal oversight in the District of Columbia has been some motivation for you to run for this office. I know we just came out of this federal surge from President Trump, but it appears that ICE and MPD are still working together. At least that's what your own chairman said today. And so I'm wondering, that would particularly fall in terms of oversight within your committee. Are you concerned about this continued partnership between MPD and ICE and what's occurring?
I'm very concerned. And when I see what's been happening to so many of our neighbors with ICE and the fear and the traumatization that's in our communities of people being taken on their way to work or taking their children to school, it is really undermining the fabric of our community safety in a very troubling way. And so when it comes to MPD, I remain concerned to make sure that our local police department has the support that they need to do their local responsibilities and making sure that they're following local law. And that's something that I speak to Chief Smith about very regularly, and our oversight is going to continue to ensure that district residents' rights are being honored and followed, and that our local police department is doing local functions in the way that they should.
Now, Councilmember Pinto, we have roughly 30 seconds left. We're in the midst of a federal government shutdown. If you were on the Hill right now, what would you be doing? What would you be telling your fellow lawmakers?
Well, when the government gets shut down, it affects very real people's lives, people's paychecks, people's uncertainty, if they're going to have a job. We have many industries that are, even if you're not a federal worker, that are connected to the federal government operations. And so it's extremely important to the livelihoods of many of our residents and our economy. But we have a larger responsibility as a federal government to operate the government and make sure that it is not used as a political pawn. And so this reluctance to negotiate and to make sure that we can both preserve healthcare for people and operate our government is not acceptable, and is something that I would work on very closely with my congressional partners on both sides of the aisle to make sure that we can get the government open.
Big ambitions for sure. Council Member Brooke Pinto, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me.
And at-large D.C. Council Member Robert White is also in the race for this congressional seat. He joined us on WUSA 9 last month to talk about his campaign. You can watch our entire conversation with Council Member White right now on WUSA9.com and on our WUSA 9 YouTube page.
All right.